They've ruled since the 1400s and still do. In hidden palaces, in private trusts, in silent halls of power, a handful of old European dynasties quietly shape global markets, defense contracts, media narratives, even political outcomes. You've heard of new billionaires. But what if the richest, most powerful names never appear on Forbes covers? What if the real puppeteers are families with roots in medieval courts? In this video, we'll uncover how one family uses property in London and Paris to control real estate value far beyond Europe. How a banking dynasty passes influence through secret alliances with government insiders. How modern heirs hide behind foundations and holding companies, so no one ever knows who truly calls the shots. These are not rumors. These are slow, creeping influences, often legal and very hard to detect. Let me show you exactly how this happened. Why should someone in New York, Los Angeles, or Chicago care about old European aristocrats? Because their tendrils stretch into global capital, real estate, financial networks. They help set the rules of the game you play. The world sees tech billionaires, hedge fund founders, flashy new money. But behind much of that, sources suggest, are legacy families moving capital, shaping regulation, tilting competition. Their names rarely hit headlines. Let's meet a few key players and systems. The Rothschilds, a banking dynasty beginning in 18th century Frankfurt. They helped fund railroads, national debts, and wars. Today their branches span the UK, France, Switzerland. The Wallenbergs, in Sweden, a family whose bank and investment company, Investor AB, hold stakes in Ericsson, Electrolux, Saab, and more. The Grosvenors, Dukes of Westminster, the family that owns massive swaths of high-end land in London, Mayfair, Belgravia, and whose holdings ripple into global property markets. The Wendell family in France, once in steel and heavy industry, now transformed into an investment group that still controls large shares in industrial, financial, and real estate sectors. The Liechtenstein princely house, one of the oldest European dynasties, with origins centuries ago, diversified in land, finance, art collections. These names are only part of the picture. Many more exist in Italy, Austria, Germany, the Low Countries. Mini surprise number 1. The dollar amounts of their influence often dwarf newer billionaire fortunes. Yet they stay off the usual lists. Mini surprise number 2. Some of their most powerful levers are not owning companies openly, but owning the rights to royalties, land leases, taxation shares, and concession contracts. We'll see how their influence flows through banking, property, policy, and media. Now here's where things get really interesting. If you think billionaires are made by software, think again. Many dynastic families are anchored by land. Vast, irreplaceable, illiquid, but unstoppable in value over centuries. Imagine, a single family owns dozens of acres in central London, Paris, Vienna, Berlin, land whose value doubles every few decades. Then they lease it, collect ground rents, shape development rules. The newer money buys a building. The old money owns the plot under the building. Take the Grosvenor family. For centuries, they acquired parcels of prime land around London. Today, their estate covers much of Mayfair and Belgravia, some of the most expensive real estate globally. A building in Mayfair may be worth $100 million. But the land beneath might be owned by Grosvenor, and the occupant pays lease or rent every year. That means every redevelopment, every zoning change, every infrastructure upgrade, Grosvenor gets a cut. Now, imagine replicating that model across multiple cities worldwide. That's what some dynastic families have done. Every time a developer wants to build, they negotiate with that trust. Every time the city upgrades transit, property values rise, and the family's receipts rise. Contrast then versus now. In the Middle Ages, lords owned castles and farmland. Today, the lords own urban parcels. The form changes, but the principle remains. Control the land, control the future income. Here's another example, the Wendell family in France. Originally steel and industry, they retained land and infrastructure assets. When governments nationalized steel in the 20th century, Wendell shifted into investment holdings, but kept their land and leases as a stable base. To tie to your life, if your city is redeveloping downtown, your taxes, your zoning, your rents, all of this could be funneled in part to these silent landlords. You may never see their name, but you feel their influence. But if you think that's crazy, wait until you hear this. Land gives a base. But to move money, you need banking and investment networks, and these old families built those networks over centuries. The Rothschilds were pioneers in cross-border finance. In the early 19th century, Mayor Amschel Rothschild set up branches in Frankfurt, London, Paris, Vienna, Naples. Governments borrowed money, wars were financed, railroads were built. The family's reach extended into national treasuries. Over time, their public banking role faded. Now, they are less visible, but sources suggest they still hold hidden stakes, manage private banking arms, and co-invest with giant funds. The Wallenbergs in Sweden took a more modern route. Their investment firm, Investor AB, holds blocks in industry, telecom, defense, and more. They often sit quietly, sometimes behind holds blocks in industry, telecom, defense, and more. They often sit quietly, sometimes behind shell companies. When the EU debates telecom regulation or defense procurement or infrastructure contracts, Wallenberg-aligned firms often emerge as qualified bidders. Critics argue this hints at undue influence. Contrast insider versus public. A publicly traded company might have thousands of shareholders. But with hidden family block ownership, one family can steer outcomes, board seats, CEO appointments, dividend policy, all behind the scenes. In one whisper of history, critics argue the Wallenberg family influenced the EU's digital single market plan in ways that benefited Ericsson, a company in which they hold interest. Another method, debt rights and royalties. Instead of owning a company outright, a family might own a controlling share of its debt instruments or licensing rights. When the company needs to borrow, it turns to institutions the family influences. Then the family extracts interest or royalties. Here's how that works. Suppose a tech company wants to roll out infrastructure across Europe. It is borrowed from a friendly bank. That bank is partly controlled by a legacy family. The interest payments flow back. The borrower thinks it's ordinary financing, but in truth, a legacy family is upstream. These hidden routes mean influence is often untraceable. The public sees a corporate label. The real owner is behind layers of trusts, holding companies, and offshore entities. But that's not all. The game also involves alliances with political elites. Let's head there next. This brings us to the most shocking discovery of all. Here is where it all locks together, and where you see how billionaires buy influence without anyone noticing. Consider this. If you control land, you control urban development. If you control finance, you command capital flow. Now, if you can quietly shape policy, zoning, regulation, standards, public procurement, you become a silent ruler. One powerful move, placing trusted operatives into advisory boards, think tanks, and regulatory bodies. These are people who seem independent, but interviews and leaked documents sometimes reveal connections to old families. Another, foundation funding and philanthropy. A family gives millions to a research center, university, or policy institute. That institute publishes a study. Policymakers cite it. The family's narrative becomes legitimate expertise. The public rarely links the funding back to the family. Consider the Knut and Alice Wallenberg Foundation in Sweden. It is one of Europe's largest private foundations funding science, education, and research. It gives the family soft power, trust, prestige, and influence in policy debates. Or the Rothschilds. Their philanthropic arms, museums, and art donations grant them cultural legitimacy. Their voice gains weight in circles of influence. Then there's the strategic marriage and alliance network. Over centuries, old families intermarried, bound themselves by contract, creating a web of loyalties across countries. One cousin in banking, one in industry, one in diplomacy. In modern times, such alliances can place family-aligned people in parliaments, cabinets, or diplomatic corps, all with subtle loyalty lines. Picture a European summit room. A minister speaks up for regulation that favors telecom. The editor of the Financial Journal praising it just received a grant from a foundation connected to a family. The journalist quoting the think tank is funded by that same foundation. The CEO benefiting is partially owned by the family. No obvious conspiracy, yet the alignment is perfect. The biggest twist. Some dynastic families have veto power in multilateral bodies, via influence networks. When EU or global trade bodies pick standards, these families' companies may sit on committees. According to some analysts, legacy capital sometimes shapes which technologies get privileged. 5G, green energy standards, defense tech, all through committee influence. Thus, a new software startup might be technically better, but fails to get regulation approval because it lacks a legacy backer. A well-connected firm gets a subsidy. The invisible hand guiding things is not always the free market, it's the families behind it. So what does all this mean for us today? This isn't a fairy tale. It's a map of hidden power. Why this matters to you, even in America, many global deals, trade rules, supply chains, commodities, these are shaped in Europe as much as Asia or the US. The rules set partly their ripple everywhere. Short term. Regulatory decisions might favor legacy-backed firms, stifle agile startups, weight capital flows toward trusted networks. Political campaigns may get quiet funding. Media stories may subtly favor narratives that protect old wealth. Long term, this can erode meritocracy. New talent and innovation may be edged out. Capital accumulates in fewer hands. Democratic institutions may weaken if citizens feel rules are rigged behind closed doors. One prediction: we'll see more regulation demanding ownership transparency. That pressure will come from public demand, media, and NGOs. Families will respond by creating ever more opaque layers, new jurisdictions, new trust vehicles. Another, we might see alliances between new billionaires and old dynasties. A tech founder marries into a legacy line or sells a stake to a family office, gaining silent backing and protection. Your takeaway: power doesn't always hide in obvious places. Knowing where to look, land records, foundation disclosures, board memberships, is the first defense. We've only scratched the surface. The loop we opened, they've ruled since the 1400s, is not just metaphor. It's real. And the influence is alive, evolving. Before we wrap up, there's one final thing you need to know. One more twist. Some of these old families are quietly converting their legacy into soft currencies of influence, patents, tech platforms, intellectual property, data. Instead of just owning land or banks, some are investing in platforms, AI, biotech, surveillance, digital infrastructure. Not to run them openly, but to own the protocols, own the standards, own the licensing. Imagine a future where a new AI product requires a license under a protocol owned by a legacy holding. The startup pays royalties to that family forever. The family doesn't appear in headlines, but they siphon value. This is not far-fetched. Sources suggest legacy capital is funneling stealth funding into key tech standards committees and infrastructure platforms. The idea: own the protocol, not the app. We came in with the hook. They've ruled since the 1400s. Now we see how that rule adapts to land, to finance, to policy, to digital bones of our world. The same power, new forms. The loop closes. The old families didn't die. They transformed. And they still stand behind the scenes, waiting, calculating, influencing. If this opened your eyes, then the next video will go deeper. We'll trace one modern heir, one hidden structure, from castle to server farm. You'll see their moves in America. Let's recap what we've learned. A few centuries-old European dynasties still control crucial land, leases, and urban development. They extend power through hidden banking, debt rights, and investment block ownership. They shape policy and standards through foundations, think tanks, and quietly placed allies. Now they're evolving into owning digital protocols and licensing regimes, controlling value in the internet age. If you found this illuminating, smash that like button. Subscribe if you want more deep dives into hidden influence and luxury power. Turn on bell notifications so you don't miss the next chapter, when we trace one legacy structure from castle to server. I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Which legacy influence surprised you most? Land ownership, hidden finance, or policy control? Why? If you want to dig further, I'll link sources and read the description. Also, check out my newsletter where I map hidden factors in wealth and power. Join our community and you'll get early access to upcoming videos, behind-the-scenes research, and Q&A invites. Thank you for reading. The old families remain, but now we see their hands. And when you know where to look, influence becomes less invisible and more accountable. Until next time, stay curious, stay sharp,